Okay, if everyone could take their seats, we're going to get started with tonight's meeting. Thank you. I'd like to welcome everybody here. This is a stakeholders meeting for the Melford Infrastructure Townhouse Detailed Site Plan. I'm Joe Meinert. I'm the City of Bowie Planning Director, and I was going to just introduce this meeting to you tonight. I think some of you are familiar with the city's stakeholder meeting process. The City Council set this process up a few years ago, and what they wanted to do is allow the community to come out and hear about a project before it moved forward, so that you would have a chance to ask questions about it, learn about it, and that as well that the developer could hear what your concerns might be about their plans and try to address the concerns. So what we're reviewing tonight in this meeting is an infrastructure detailed site plan for the townhouse component of the Melford project. And this is right in the center of the site, and St. John Properties is going to give a presentation and orient you to the site. But what I wanted to do before I turn it over to them is describe what an infrastructure detailed site plan is. The city has done a few of these in the past. Prince George's County allows developers to move forward for site plan approval for grading and installation of utilities and things like that. And so the plan that's before us tonight, which I have on these boards, I brought the actual plan drawings. There's 6 sheets. It's a really zoomed in version of the site where the townhouses will be constructed. What we have on the plan is the lot lines that were approved on the preliminary plan of subdivision last year. The county approved that plan, and what this plan does is just zooms in closer and shows where the storm drains are going to be located, where the water and sewer lines are going to be located, where all of the sidewalks and on-street parking spaces will be, and some of the landscaping. So the purpose of the detailed site plan for infrastructure is just that. It's to get you to a level of detail where you can understand how the site is going to be served by the utilities, how it's going to be graded. There is no townhouse building proposed in this plan. The developer will have to come back at a future date when they have townhouse builders, and they'll do a revision to this site plan, and they'll show you the architecture and discuss the types of models that they're going to build. But that's not what we're reviewing tonight. We're only looking at the site and how it's being served by the infrastructure and the utilities. Going forward, our plan was to take this plan to the City Council on June 4th on the consent agenda. This is a technical plan, and we don't expect that there will be many issues related to it, and that's the plan going forward. So if we have any questions about the plan tonight, you'll have an opportunity, everyone will have an opportunity to ask their questions, and hopefully we'll be able to answer those questions tonight. So at this point, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Robert Antonetti.
Good evening, everyone. Good to see everybody. Tonight, my name is Robert Antonetti with the law firm of Shipley & Horn. I'm pleased to be here on behalf of St. John Properties, the applicant for this particular detailed site plan. As many of you have been here before with us in these types of meetings, I do want to introduce our team. I have Mr. Andrew Roud, regional partner with St. John Properties, here with us. I have the partner with St. John Somerset Construction, Mr. Mike Carruthers, here. Next to him, I have Mr. Chris Rizzi, landscape architect with Bowler Engineering. I have Ms. Cecily Bedwell with Design Collective regarding some of the planning aspects of what you're going to see tonight. Also with St. John, I have Mr. Ken Finley, a development manager for the project, and Jen Hearn here tonight as well, a development coordinator for the work you see tonight for the Melford Town Center. As Mr. Meinert mentioned, tonight this is a detailed site plan for infrastructure only. I think he did a pretty thorough job explaining what that is. This is for a portion of the Melford Town Center that was indicated for residential development, particularly attached dwelling units. I think the preliminary plan itself approved 293 townhouses and or 2/2 units. I believe 88 potential 2/2 attached dwelling units, which look like townhouses. But just to go down memory road a little bit, just to give context and orientation of where we've been and where we're headed. Initially, the first mixed-use reimagination or entitlement plan was the conceptual site plan, which was approved in 2015, which approved up to 2,500 residential units. Many of you are familiar with that and that process that occurred. That was approved by the planning board, the county, and was endorsed by the city. It approved up to 260,000 square feet of office and up to 268,000 square feet of retail. 2017, a preliminary plan of subdivision, which we're borrowing heavily upon for this detailed site plan for infrastructure, approved 1,793 units, up to 124,500 square feet of retail, and up to 235,000 square feet of commercial space. Subsequent to that, we've had 3 detailed site plans come through the city stakeholders process. The first one was also an infrastructure-only plan. It was an infrastructure plan for pretty much the entirety of the Melford Town Center, which is what you see here today outlined in yellow. And that was to essentially do rough grading for that area to get it ready for future development. It also provided for the construction of a retaining wall and basically the construction of the major east-west boulevard, we're calling it, shown on the dotted line, moving east to west within that yellow boundary. If we can move to the next slide, Jen, please. What you see here is the preliminary plan of subdivision illustrative plan that was presented to the city, presented to the county, and was part of the record of the preliminary plan case. What we have outlined in red in this previously approved exhibit is essentially the configuration of the detailed site plan boundaries of the 4 corners of the area which we're looking to get approval for infrastructure. What it does show is a certain lotting pattern. It does show the 293 attached units, as I discussed, how the streets work, and how the open spaces will work. Again, tonight, we are not here to present any architecture. There are no buildings proposed. That will come as part of a revision to a future detailed site plan. But this is meant to get some of the infrastructure legwork in, the streets, utilities, et cetera, associated with this component of the overall project. If we can move to the next slide, please. Here is a network, a pedestrian circulation network that was also approved with the preliminary plan, again, to give context to the streets that we're proposing in this detailed site plan. As you can see, the area that we're talking about is to the east of the historic setting for the Melford House. It does show a various network of streets and intersecting alleys to support the attached residential uses. And in our conceptual site plan, these neighborhoods were essentially the southeast and southwest neighborhoods in the design guidelines, which were approved with the conceptual site plan. And here's my book. I know it's tattered and marked up, but we've done a lot of work over the years with it, so I keep this with me most of the time. If we go to the next slide, please, Jen. So at this point, I think I'm going to turn it over to Chris Rizzi at Bowler to just quickly walk through the plan. These are basically zoom-ins or things that you see on the floor here. This is the preliminary plan of subdivision. This was the lotting pattern, the street network that were approved for each of these sections. So I think Chris is going to walk you through this and then walk you into the detailed site plan to show really they marry up. They're almost duplicates of one another. And then we'll turn over to Cecily to give you some orientation as to the open space that will be programmed in the future, but to show that what was shown in the preliminary plan is still being preserved as part of this infrastructure plan. And then we'll open it up for questions and have discussion and have a dialogue at that point. But ma'am, I'll take your question.
I'm disoriented. I can't find my way around. I can't see the small print from here. But if you could show me, I go to the doctors over there on Science Drive. Okay. If you could show me where Science Drive is, I think I have more orientation of
Sure. So Jen, why don't you pull off of Route 3 in the interchange, coming in on Melford Boulevard. So,
there it is.
So if you head up to the northeast, that's Science Drive. Okay. And there's office buildings on both sides of Science Drive. So I imagine your physician's in one of those buildings.
On the other side of the lake.
Yes.
That's really pretty over there.
Mhm.
I hate to see it.
Well, it is pretty, it'll remain pretty, but we're proposing is even farther south than what you won't be
So
able
how
to see
big
it
is
from the
the
lake,
buffer?
essentially.
How big is the buffer?
The
Between
buffer?
the lake and the townhouses?
Well, again, this development is in red, if you can see the lake to the
Okay,
north,
I
so
see.
there's a big space between
Okay,
that.
so all that other stuff is, okay,
Correct.
I got you. Now I know where I am.
Sorry,
Thank you.
That was a good pause, so we're all kind of oriented in the same spot. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Rizzi, and Chris, if you could be so kind to walk us through what we're seeing.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Rob. So this is actually a graphic showing the previously approved preliminary plan of subdivision that has gone through both the city process and process with the county. You'll see a lot of similarities between what you're looking at on the screen here and what we'll show you on the detailed site plan that are also around the edges of the property here for the infrastructure. So what you have here is basically a combination of private alleys and public roads around the Melford house in the middle. The area in red is part of the southwest neighborhood. Curie Drive running north-south in the picture there. And you can jump to the next slide. And then this would be over on the east side of Curie Drive, also from the previously approved preliminary plan, showing you can see the townhouse area with the public streets and the private streets running through them as approved on the preliminary plan of subdivision in the southeast portion of the site. And then there's the furthest corner right where Melford Boulevard intersects with Marconi Drive, all the way at the southeast corner of the project, again outlined in red from the preliminary plan. So as an evolution from this, you can jump to the next slide. So this is kind of an overall from the detailed site plan that we've presented with the city now. What's outlined in red are the limits of the detailed site plan for this infrastructure. The infrastructure would include water, sewer, utilities, stormwater management, roads, curbs, those kinds of things. It's not quite as colorful as some of the other detailed site plans that you all may have seen coming through here. From an engineer's perspective, maybe it looks great, but I'm sure from some perspectives it's not quite as exciting. And it's, again, a combination of private and public streets, private alleys, public roads, connecting the network, and the road network, alley network, and the overall land use layout is identical to what was approved on the preliminary plan previously. So it remains consistent. This is evolving from a standpoint for the detailed site plan to where we've dug a little deeper into finalizing the grading associated with the detailed site plan. You can jump through. And then these sheets are just kind of zoomed in versions of the overall that you were just looking at, walking you through portions of the southwest and then moving over to the southeast here neighborhood to show a little more detail. And again, Joe Minert pointed out that these are around the perimeter of the room as well, showing where you have your different utilities running, in some cases in the alleys, in some cases in the public streets, all again consistent with the preliminary plan of subdivision that was previously approved. And those are our trail connections on the easternmost edge to your trails over in the east. And with that, Cecily's going to talk to some of our connectivity with the open spaces on the project.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us here. My name again is Cecily Bedwell. I'm with the firm Design Collective in Baltimore. And our job here was to look at the street and block network as well as the open space and landscape. So what I'll show to you tonight is how this overall townhouse area plugs into Melford and how the streets and blocks work, as well as how the open space forms a network along with the trails that Rob already pointed out. So here you see an overall plan looking at the open space network. So that consists of everything from the Melford house, which is number 3. Oh, thank you I'll point that out as well here. And then we have the system of streets and blocks. And those are consistent with good scale for townhouses. So as Chris mentioned, we have the streets. We also have a system of alleys that serve the rear of the townhouses, providing garage access. And within those blocks, we're also accommodating, and we'll zoom into a couple of the open spaces, but we have several attached greens. You can see those in multiple locations marked as 6. We're going to zoom in just a moment to this particular one north of the Thrive building. It's sort of mid-block, so just to the north of this street, and then we'll zoom in again to another attached green that fits into this curve in the road and then continues to the trail network. The trail network happens in a number of places along the east side of this pond here, and then comes in and connects, and we'll see that in a little bit more detail. We also have the trail around the block and around Melford that connects into the townhouse area. So if we can now zoom in, Jen, thanks. So here we are zoomed into the green that is just north of the Thrive location. You can see that it's fronted by townhouses. This is a conceptual plan, so it's what we're looking at currently, but the shape and size of it is roughly locked in. I'll point out a couple of amenities that we are looking to locate and features of this open space, and most of the other open spaces that are within the plan. So one thing that dovetails nicely with what Chris is doing with the engineering is the stormwater management, and we've located the rain gardens. You'll see those marked in number 2 here and here. We also have them in the inside corners of that block, and that way we're treating the stormwater in very small locations, and it's integrated within the open spaces, so hoping that it provides not only better stormwater management, but also education and a feature of those spaces. We have, in this case, as shown, an open lawn area. Those little black dots are people, so you can get a sense of the scale of that space. And, you know, it's somewhat protected from the streets. We have the street trees along the edge, a sidewalk, and then that large open space.
What do the numbers represent?
So they're keyed to a couple of these precedent photos that we have here. So as I mentioned, number 2 is the rain garden area, and you'll see several of those. So you'll see a rain garden located here, and we've worked with Chris Rizzi at Bowler to locate those where they would help to collect stormwater and to treat it. The open lawn is indicated by 1. We've framed that lawn by other tree plantings, and then again the street trees along. So again, a passive green is thought of in this place, a place that, you know, people can sit and rest, but they can also, the kids can run in that area. The rain gardens, as I mentioned, and there may be locations for other smaller seating areas throughout the edges of this. Okay, we can, yeah, thanks, Jen. So here we are looking at that other open space that I talked about. This one has the trail system that comes in from around that pond to the east and then would connect in and then crossing the street here to this open space. So this one's a little bit smaller, but it's a series of spaces. Again, we have that bend in the road, which we're using to have some, again, passive seating areas and open lawn spaces, but also to incorporate the rainwater management, stormwater management and rain gardens. So you'll see those indicated in several places, again, some mid-block and some within the open spaces. Here, because it's pretty protected, there may be some features as a tot lot or playground. And again, the idea is that these spaces, along with the street and blocks, form a network of open spaces. So you can move from the trails to the streets to a series of these open spaces throughout the plan. And you would connect, if you're a neighbor visiting a neighbor, you can walk through these spaces to get to your neighbors or go to the trails, and there'll be fitness stations, et cetera, along those trails. So I think that would be it. I think that's the last of the slides, right? Okay.
Thank you, Cecily. So, in essence, again, this is a detailed site plan, really for the infrastructure for this section. It's within the 4 corners of this section that was shown up here. It's laid out match line by match line here on these sheets. They all put together, they marry up to the overall that we showed on the screen behind us. And again, in terms of coming back to you with architecture for particular buildings, once this is approved, and we're going to continue to look for builder partners for development of these particular lots. And while I can't say for certain when that construction or that next proposal for architecture will come forward, I would imagine, within the next 24 months that we would come forward with something for approval with a builder or builders who may want to come here and develop the attached units that the infrastructure here is going to support in the future. So with that, I believe that concludes our presentation in chief. And if we could open it up to the floor and take any questions and have a conversation about this. Ma'am?
What style of townhouses are you all
Well, right now we don't have any specific use, but I would imagine it would be something like a colonial or federal style. Although that's, at least there'll be elements of that, in particular in the architecture, but that will be refined and developed when builders have been selected and we move forward with the architectural site plan, which we will come back again and present that and show compatibility with the overall scheme. I will say that regulating elements of the buildings, there's cues and references in these design guidelines that were approved with the conceptual site plan. So we'll adhere to that, and we look forward to bringing high quality, very attractive building types, whoever the builder partner will be.
I know you haven't gotten to some of the details like all the townhouses, but do you expect that they'll have their own garages and
Yes.
or handle all the cars coming in?
Yes, they'll all be garage served. And there'll be opportunities for one-street parking as well for guests and visitors along some of the private streets. But they'll all have, I believe, 2-car garages plus driveways. And rear loaded as well. So and there's also the possibility for some detached garages, depending if a builder wants to do that as an option. So we expect a variety of architectural types, but they'll all have off-street parking opportunities in their lots.
So most of the townhouses will have like the bottom floor will be the garages.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am?
Well, I was thinking that maybe one of the attractions of this area was the train station, Mark Train. Because that would go either to Baltimore or Washington for commuters. And I just was wondering how you would get to the train station from this.
So the one by Louis.
Maybe that's not something you're
Well, it is. It's
involved in, but
so you're referring to the Bowie State Mark
Yeah.
train station. Yeah, they would take 197 to access it.
around 50 you go.
Yeah.
Up one.
So yeah, we imagine people will utilize that. That's a good rail link to the city and to Baltimore. Yeah.
Worked in DC a minute.
Okay.
So, but I live up close to the station, so down here you can kind of, would you get there? Do you think it's something that would be used?
Yes, I do.
Is that one of the attractions of the place?
Yes. We think that that'll be part of the fabric of all the transportation options. One of the main things here is that Melford's surrounded by a significant amount of existing or approved offices or employment uses of almost 1.5 million square feet. So the hope is with this dense compact development is that the mix of uses, people who live here will also have the opportunity to work here and be able to walk or bike to their office and to some of the retail amenities that were shown in an earlier plan. So we're hoping to take some cars off the roads through the presentation of a mix of uses of the site. Yes, ma'am?
Yes, but you're really adding about 700 more cars on the road. I'm coming into this late, and what you've shown me seems very nice. Very well planned and very nice environment. This was approved, when was it approved?
So Melford,
Melford itself was approved
in the 1980s, it was zoned
for.
for
building.
several million square feet of offices. So there was a certain trip generation or vehicular generation from all those uses. And at that time, the applicant went through the review process, did its public facility tests through its preliminary plan of subdivision, and they were required to make improvements to the local road networks, both on-site and off-site, including 301 and 3. And as we know, those roads, and I've said this in our presentation, our conversations in the past, those are regional roads with certain pressures, and we're not denying that. But way back when, this applicant made improvements to those intersections to justify the millions of square feet of office. So what we did through our,
But this was zoned for that.
that's right, it was,
A long time ago.
yep,
Okay,
1980s.
so I'm a little late here.
Well, no, as you can see, it's an ongoing venture, so you're still in time, and we're glad you could participate.
Was anybody concerned about 700 more cars on the road? I've only been involved with the city government for about a year, so
Okay.
I'm new to this.
Right.
But I got this distinct impression from coming to the meetings that the city council is very concerned about the air quality and the traffic congestion, the quality of our roads, our green spaces. And it bothers me that most people have 2 cars. So the capacity of the townhouses, you basically double that.
So
That's what concerns me.
your concerns were shared by many folks.
And ignored?
No. Those concerns about traffic was thoroughly looked at, not only as a requirement of the applications themselves, particularly the preliminary plan of subdivision, but by the city council, the city's planning staff, the county's planning staff. So they weren't ignored, they were analyzed according to both the regulations in place for how do you measure impacts, not only the roads, but to fire and police response times,
Yeah.
impacts to schools, impacts on the capacity of water and sewer facilities, whether there's available water and sewer, and its totality, all those things were looked at. And the reason I went back to the 1980s and through the early 90s was just to recognize that this site really has been designated for several decades now as to be intensely developed with something. We've taken that single use.
That was before my time.
Sure,
Yeah.
and before I represented them, but we've taken it from that single use and we've converted it to a mix of uses. And what that has done
What do
is
you mean by mix of uses?
residential, retail, and office, where before it was just basically entirely office employment uses. There wasn't.
See, I kind of like the office because that would make more jobs for the people that already live here and wouldn't have 700 more cars to impact
Let me help you.
negatively.
Let me help.
Yeah, Mr. Rao can speak about the philosophy of how it's developed and why the
Is this
change.
a philosophy?
This is a little bit of deja vu all over again in every single hearing, but it kind of goes like this. The simple way to look at it is, when the project was, when it was developed years ago,
Yeah.
there's all these prescriptive things you have to go through. And one of those things is you have to examine traffic. So when all these improvements were done, as Rob mentioned before, you could do, by right, you could do about 3 million square feet of office. Let's just, amongst friends, call it 3 million. So with the 3 million square feet of office, there had to be necessary road improvements made.
Right.
So improvements made up at 3 and 450, improvements at Governor Bridge, all these improvements were made. So the government and the traffic people calculate and say, the 3 million square feet will impact traffic at X, all right? And they ascribe a bunch of trips to that. It's almost like a bucket of trips. They pour all the trips into the bucket. Then they say, in order to mitigate those trips, you have to do the following improvements, where the previous developers, including St. John, spent millions of dollars. So these improvements made way up at 3 and 450, or an extra turn lane, for example. Stuff at Governor Bridge Road, all that stuff was done.
But there
Here-
isn't a new bridge there.
Here's the problem. What the issue is, so the trips were done and paid for, and you almost think of it like you have a little token. So they said, your 3 million trips equals all these improvements, because it's a bunch of trips equal cars. 3 million office people will produce this amount of cars. Here the improvements are made, so we're holding,
Amount of cars coming daily into the
Yes.
area,
Mhm.
but not additional cars to the city of Bowie.
Oh, certainly.
all of it.
They're all
the
additional.
aggregate. The aggregate trips, the increased amount of trips. They look at volume, trips going in and trips going out.
I'm looking at numbers.
It's the same
quantity-
thing. It's the same
Quantity
thing.
of cars.
They measure the volume in the
Did
morning
anybody do a thing on what our quality, how it's going to impact our air?
ad
quality of
nauseum.
air? Really, really?
Well, let me finish so you go ahead and you calculate the trips in and the trips out, and there's this bucket of trips, okay? And then when the developer spends millions of dollars and fixes and does improvements to these road systems, they give us tokens, let's call it. The difference was, the market crashed in the 80s and the 90s, and the 3 million square feet of office didn't get developed. So in real time, when we made those trip improvements, and let's pretend the economy was amazing, you would have seen 3 million square feet of office here. So this entire thing you're looking at on that wall would be nothing but office.
I would have liked that better.
Okay, now here's why you won't. Bear with me. So you're saying you like that, but then you're saying you're concerned about the cars. Now you have that filled with cars and trips. There were more trips, more cars, more what you're concerned about in the old scheme that showed the 3 million square feet of office. When we calculated out, the engineers calculate out what that 3 million square feet of office equals in trip generation by residential use, it dropped it to 2,500 residential trips. So here's the most important part of my story. The 2,500 residential units equaled exactly the additional 1.5 million square feet of office that you said you prefer. So they're equal, right? We're coming in with an application tonight that says we're not building 2,500 units. We're only building 1,793. So there's an additional, how many trips is that left on the table? I was terrible at math. Those trips are not coming under this scenario. Under the scenario you said you prefer having office, you would take all the trips that you're looking at here and you'd add another 300 or 400 or 500. This is less trips than the office.
See, I don't.
That's a long story, but the answer is you're looking at less impact now than if I went ahead and built the office that you said you'd like.
I either don't understand.
I can talk to you offline if you want to go through it.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to do that, but it's a mathematical thing. It's nothing more, nothing less. So this prescriptive procedures they run, and Rob is right. The city's people look at it, the county's people look at it, the state highway administration looks at it, and it's not, I'm a lay person, I'm not an engineer, but the traffic engineers come back and they throw it in the computer and say, this is what it is. I can sit there and voice my opinion as a developer and say, well, I don't agree with you, but I'm not a certified traffic engineer, I'm not a professional engineer. So my opinion and $1.80 will get me a cup of coffee somewhere maybe.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's the long-winded story, but the short version of it is that creates less trips than filling the whole thing with office, significantly less.
Okay,
Does
but,
that help?
yeah, let's talk.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll talk. We can
good.
talk.
Yeah, thank you, I appreciate you
Yep, no
taking the
problem.
time to do that.
Thank you, thank you. Any other questions?
Your detailed plans over there have these private alleys. Can you talk about that?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
They're private alleys marked on the drawings. It looks like they're
Yes.
lined between all the
Right,
towns.
right.
So what's the purpose of those and what's, because they're not, it seems to be unique to this development.
Well, actually, private alleys are around the county. It's a requirement that townhomes be accessed not from a public street, but by a private alley. And that has to do with the maintenance of those streets, the maintenance of so many driveway entrances close to one another. The county, usually the municipality doesn't want the obligation to maintain those and service those. So the way we have this set up is really in line with how it's done everywhere else in the county. So townhouses are fed by private alleys throughout the county.
Is the garage accessed by the alley or is the garage accessed from the?
By the alley.
By the
By
alley.
the alley, yes.
Who did you say maintains the alley?
So those are private streets, so that those should be privately maintained by the association, plowed. Trash pickup can go back in there and pick up trash and recyclables, but they're wide enough for that. But otherwise, it's a private exercise. It's not a publicly maintained
Would be some
street.
homeowners organization or something involved in
Yeah.
that's doing that?
Yes, there'll be an association for For the townhouse attached, these units here, they'll have their own association. And there'll be association fees, and that'll go towards the collective maintenance of these private facilities.
Are you expecting on these, townhouses to be like small garden plots or small green areas to be associated, or is it all gonna be brick and mortar?
Oh, there'll be front and rear yards, there'll be side yards on the end of the sticks, so, there'll be green areas in addition to the open spaces that Cecily, showed, that will be community and plus some of the stormwater management, facilities required under city and state law, so yes, that each lot should have its own associated green space, and the, community itself will have some at-large, community green spaces as well.
So the next question I have is related to the water hookup, is you're connecting to the city water, WSSC.
WSSC.
For the water source, is each townhouse connected to the city water separately, or is it combined as one entity?
Each townhouse will have its own, will have its own, water house, its own connection to the public
Its
water.
own meter, so every townhome will be paying city of Bowie separately for water source.
Well, I'm pretty sure it's WSSC, not the city of Bowie,
Okay.
for water in this project.
Okay, so that's a question I had. If the city of Bowie is selling water to WSSC to then sell to these townhomes, how does our maintenance fee for the water improvement get imposed on WSSC to get passed over to these units?
I can't answer that. That's a question of Public Works Department.
We'd like to know that, because we're having to pay this fee to maintain the water system, which is now being provided to this site. And we want to make sure that all the users of that water are also paying those fees, so we're not subsidizing everybody else using the water system.
I'll try to find out.
I mean, theoretically, it's gonna lower the cost to everyone, because you have a fixed cost of the overall system, and then you're adding in more units, it's gonna reduce the overall operational cost. You have 1,000 people to pay the bill,
You would think that our water system doesn't work that way.
and this was examined under preliminary plan of subdivision, correct? Yeah, Jen, could you go to a couple slides in? One more?
Sorry, it takes
Oh,
a
sorry. See the plans here? The red stamp down the bottom, preliminary plan of subdivision approved in April 17. All this stuff that you're talking about, I do recall some of this discussion back in the preliminary plan days, because that's sort of the technical plan. This came up previously in the hearing, but all that stuff has gone through the system with both the county and the city. So I can't answer exactly what you're talking about, but again, when I joked about deja vu all over again, this is exactly deja vu over again. I remember one of the nights in one of the hearings, we discussed what we were talking about for 20 or 30 minutes. But at the end of the day, you get to these plans where, as Rob mentioned before, this has been vetted, discussed, approved, and stamped. I think, I can't even read the date, it says April 16th of 2017. So your questions,
April 6th.
I'm not saying your question's not legitimate, but it was already vetted 2 years ago almost.
It's a very specific question.
But I think the question, as far as what I know, Jim, the city sells the water to WSSC, but everything else is WSSC. It's not the city water customers that are affected.
They're using the Bowie water system as the source for the water.
I can find out if there's any implication for the Bowie customers, but my belief is that there's not.
So do you think that all they're doing is paying WSSC for the water the same rate that the Bowie citizens are paying for the water, and they're not paying the fees on top of it?
I don't know the complete answer, so I'm gonna have to check into that for you.
We pay connection fees, don't we? There must be.
There is
WSSC. I mean, I would imagine that it's put into the rate that the city sells to WSSC. I don't know for sure, but,
So the city has to answer that.
right.
Next question has to do with the open spaces. I mean, there are a lot of nice open spaces up there, but who is responsible for maintaining those?
The association, to
Association.
be formed, the association for
And
this.
that includes the Melford House property also?
No, I believe no. That should be handled under an umbrella association for the entire Melford Town Center. which is to be formed. That could change, but there will be an association that would, look after various elements. There may be 1, 2, or 3 associations based on the different use types. There might be a multifamily and retail association. There might be a townhouse association. And perhaps there would be an umbrella association where each one of those other associations contributes to some of the common area maintenance for things, perhaps such as the Melford House. I will say that the Melford House, the ultimate goal, if we can do it, is find an adaptive reuse for it. Some type of venue that would utilize it as opposed to just keeping it static and up on the hill and pretty to look at. St. John Properties put over $800,000 in restoring it, at least to a residential standard. There's an investment that needs to be made to make it to a commercial standard, but we're certainly open as part of this project as it moves forward to find some type of appropriate complementary adaptive reuse. And we think those chances increase exponentially when these uses around it develop, and there's a lot of interest in the site as a whole. So we're hopeful that we get to that.
But to answer your question, I think I know what you're asking is, at the end of the day, the taxpayer will pay it. So whatever vehicle we put that in, it never reaches back towards
It's
the
not the
tax.
city's responsibility.
It's never, it's not
It's
city's
not
responsibility.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's what you're getting at.
Any other questions?
Okay, if you think of any other questions, please call us at the planning department, let us know what your concerns are. We appreciate you all coming out tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.